The door to the Paris apartment was heavier than I expected, its old brass handle cooled beneath my fingers. The Airbnb listing had promised historic charm and modern luxury. As I stepped inside, I felt the hush of thick stone walls and the distant hum of city life below. My suitcase wheels clicked against the herringbone wood floor. The air smelled faintly of lavender and something older, centuries of dust, perhaps, or the ghost of a tenant long gone. I set my bag by the door and took a slow breath, letting the quiet settle around me. The living room was small but elegant, with a velvet settee beneath tall windows and a marble fireplace that looked as if it had never been used. Sunlight filtered through gauzy curtains, painting the parquet in gold. I wandered from room to room, running my hand along the ornate molding, peeking into the tiny kitchen with its copper pots and espresso machine. The bedroom was at the end of a narrow hallway, the bed made with crisp white sheets, a single rose in a glass vase on the nightstand. I smiled, thinking how perfect it all was, how lucky I was to have found this place for my week in Paris. I unpacked slowly, hanging dresses in the antique armoire, lining up my shoes beneath the window. My phone buzzed with a welcome message from the host. "Enjoy your stay? Let me know if you need anything." I replied with a thank you, then set about making myself at home. I opened the windows to let in the city air, listening to the distant clatter of dishes from a cafe below. I made coffee, savoring the bitter warmth, and curled up on the settee with my guidebook, planning my first day. The apartment felt safe, cocooned from the world, a private sanctuary in the heart of Paris. That evening, after wandering the Marais and eating too many pastries, I returned to the apartment as dusk settled over the city. The streetlights flickered on, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. I locked the door behind me and turned on the lamps, their golden glow softening the edges of the old rooms. I took a long shower, letting the hot water ease the ache in my feet, and slipped into pajamas. As I brushed my teeth, I noticed the smoke detector above the bathroom door, a small white disc with a blinking green light. I thought nothing of it. Assuming it was just a sign of the building's modern updates, I climbed into bed, pulling the duvet up to my chin, and listened to the city's lullaby, the distant wail of a siren, the laughter of people on the street, the soft creak of the old building settling for the night. I drifted off quickly, exhaustion pulling me under. In my dreams, I wandered winding alleys and candlelit cathedrals, always searching for something just out of reach. The next morning, sunlight woke me early. I stretched, relishing the comfort of the bed, and padded barefoot to the kitchen for coffee. By the time I returned, the sky was streaked with pink and gold. I let myself in, grateful for the cool quiet of the apartment. I showered, changed into fresh clothes, and sat by the window, writing postcards to friends back home. As night fell, I noticed the blinking green light on the smoke detector again, steady, persistent, almost like it was watching me. As I waited for it to brew, I glanced around the room, noticing details I'd missed before: a chipped tile by the sink, a faint scratch on the window glass, the way the old radiator hissed and clicked. I felt a strange flutter of unease, but I shook it off. Old buildings had quirks. That was part of their charm. Spent the day exploring the city, losing myself in the Louvre or eating lunch in a crowded bistro. Wandering along the Seine, I tried to ignore it, but as I lay in bed, I found myself staring at the ceiling, counting the blinks. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, pause. It seemed brighter tonight, the green glow casting faint shadows on the walls. I rolled over, pulling the pillow over my head, and eventually fell asleep, though my dreams were restless and strange. The third night, the city was unusually quiet. I returned late from dinner with a new friend, tipsy on wine and laughter. The apartment felt different, colder somehow, as if the walls were holding their breath. I undressed in the bathroom, glancing up at the smoke detector. The green light blinked once, twice, then paused. I frowned, a chill crawling up my spine. I finished my routine quickly and hurried to bed, telling myself I was being silly. But sleep wouldn't come. I tossed and turned, the sheets twisted around my legs. I kept thinking about the smoke detector, about the way it seemed to pulse in the darkness. I sat up, heart pounding, and stared at it. Was it my imagination? Or did the light seem to flicker faster when I moved? I got out of bed and stood beneath it, squinting at the tiny lens in the center. It looked like any other smoke detector, but the blinking was wrong. Too deliberate, too rhythmic. I climbed onto a chair and reached up, my fingers trembling. The plastic was warm to the touch. I twisted it gently, feeling it loosen in my hand. As I pulled it down, I saw a tiny pinhole in the casing of a camera lens, no bigger than a bead. My stomach dropped. I stared at the device, horror rising like bile. Someone had been watching me. I stumbled off the chair, clutching the detector, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I scanned the room, searching for other cameras behind picture frames. Inside the smoke alarm in the bedroom, even in the clock on the nightstand, I found another lens hidden in the air vent, its glass eye glinting in the lamplight. Panic surged through me. I felt exposed, violated, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The third night the city was unusually quiet. I returned late from dinner with a new friend, tipsy on wine and laughter. The apartment felt different, colder somehow, as if the walls were holding their breath. I undressed in the bathroom, glancing up at the smoke detector. The green light blinked once, twice, then paused. I frowned, a chill crawling up my spine. I finished my routine quickly and hurried to bed, telling myself I was being silly. But sleep wouldn't come. I tossed and turned, the sheets twisted around my legs. I kept thinking about the smoke detector, about the way it seemed to pulse in the darkness. I sat up, heart pounding, and stared at it. Was it my imagination? Or did the light seem to flicker faster when I moved? I got out of bed and stood beneath it, squinting at the tiny lens in the center. It looked like any other smoke detector, but the blinking was wrong. Too deliberate, too rhythmic. I climbed onto a chair and reached up, my fingers trembling. The plastic was warm to the touch. I twisted it gently, feeling it loosen in my hand. As I pulled it down, I saw a tiny pinhole in the casing of a camera lens, no bigger than a bead. My stomach dropped. I stared at the device, horror rising like bile. Someone had been watching me. I stumbled off the chair, clutching the detector, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I scanned the room, searching for other cameras behind picture frames. Inside the smoke alarm in the bedroom, even in the clock on the nightstand, I found another lens hidden in the air vent, its glass eye glinting in the lamplight. Panic surged through me. I felt exposed, violated, as if the walls themselves were closing in. At the hotel, I checked in with shaking hands. The clerk eyed me curiously but said nothing. In my new room, I searched every corner, every outlet, every vent. I found nothing, but sleep still eluded me. I lay awake, listening to the hum of the city. The memory of that blinking green light burned into my mind. The next morning, I went to the police. I handed over the smoke detector, explaining what I'd found. The officer listened with a frown, jotting notes in a battered notebook. "You did the right thing," he said. "We'll look into it." But his tone was weary, as if he'd heard stories like mine before. I spent the day in a haze, wandering the city but unable to focus on anything. Every time I passed a window, I felt eyes on me.
Ow.
Every time I heard a camera shutter, I flinched. I called Airbnb's customer service, explaining what had happened. They apologized, promised an investigation, and refunded my stay. I felt changeless, trusting, more cautious, as if a layer of innocence had been stripped away. Days passed. I moved to a different hotel, then another, never staying anywhere more than a night. I checked every room for cameras, every mirror for two-way glass, started to see threats everywhere in the way a stranger looked at me on the metro, in the flicker of a street lamp, in the hum of a neighbor's TV through the wall. The police contacted me 2 days before I was due to fly home. They'd searched the apartment and found multiple hidden cameras, smoke detectors, air vents, even a tiny lens behind a painting in the living room. The footage was being analyzed, and the host was under investigation. "You're not the only victim," the officer told me. "We're contacting others." The news was both a relief and a fresh horror. I wasn't alone, but that meant others had been watched too. I wondered who they were, what they'd endured, if they'd ever know. I thought about the host, about the messages he'd sent. So friendly, so normal. I wondered what kind of person did something like this. What pleasure they took in invading the most private moments of strangers. On my last night in Paris, I stood on the balcony of my hotel, watching the city lights flicker and fade. I tried to reclaim the magic I'd felt when I first arrived, the sense of possibility, of adventure. But the city felt different now, its beauty tinged with menace. I knew I would never forget the feeling of being watched, the violation that lingered long after I left. When I boarded the plane home, I double-checked my seat, my bag, the overhead vent. I slept fitfully, waking at every sound. Back in my own apartment, I searched every corner, every outlet, every shadow. I installed new locks, new smoke detectors, new curtains. I told myself I was safe, but I never quite believed it. Months later, I received an email from the Paris police. The host had been arrested, charged with multiple counts of invasion of privacy. The footage had been destroyed, they assured me, but the memory lingered. I still flinched at the sight of a blinking light, still checked every hotel room, every Airbnb, every unfamiliar space. I learned to live with the fear, to let it sharpen rather than dull my senses. I traveled again, but I was never as carefree, never as trusting. I became an expert in hidden cameras, in privacy laws, in the ways people can be watched without ever knowing. I shared my story, warning others, hoping to spare them the violation I'd endured. The weeks after my return home passed in a blur of anxiety and restless vigilance. I tried to slip back into my old routines, work friends, the comfort of my favorite cafe, but the world felt subtly altered, as if a pane of glass now separated me from everyone else. She listened patiently as I described the Paris apartment. The blinking green light, the sense of being watched even in my most private moments. "It's not paranoia," she said gently. "It's trauma. Your boundaries were violated in a profound way." I nodded, grateful for her words, but the feeling lingered, a shadow that followed me from room to room. I found myself scanning every room for hidden lenses, every unfamiliar face for a flicker of recognition. The city's familiar sounds, the rumble of the subway, the chatter of neighbors sometimes made my heart race, as if I might hear my own name whispered in a language I didn't understand. I started seeing a therapist, hoping to untangle the knot of fear and anger that had taken root inside me. She listened patiently as I described the Paris apartment. The blinking green light, the sense of being watched even in my most private moments. "It's not paranoia," she said gently. "It's trauma. Your boundaries were violated in a profound way." I nodded, grateful for her words, but the feeling lingered, a shadow that followed me from room to room. One evening, as rain tapped against my window, I received a message from an unfamiliar number. The text was brief. "I saw your story online. It happened to me too." My hands trembled as I replied, and soon I was exchanging messages with a woman named Clara, who had stayed in the same Paris apartment just months before me. Her experience was eerily similar: the blinking light, the sense of unease, the discovery of a hidden camera. She, too, had fled in the middle of the night, her trust shattered. We spoke for hours, sharing details, piecing together a timeline. Clara had reported her experience to Airbnb, but nothing had come of it. "I thought maybe I was overreacting," she admitted. "But after I read your story, I knew I wasn't alone." Our connection was a strange, comforting reminder that the violation wasn't just mine to bear. As the investigation in Paris continued, more victims came forward. The police asked if I would testify, and I agreed, determined to see the case through. The process was slow and frustrating, full of bureaucratic delays and legal jargon. But each time I spoke with another survivor, I felt a little less powerless, a little more in control of my own story. One night, unable to sleep, I sat at my desk and began to write. I described the apartment in painstaking detail: the velvet settee, the marble fireplace, the way the light shifted through the curtains at dusk. I wrote about the fear, the anger, the sense of violation that lingered long after I left Paris. I traveled. But I was vigilant, checking every room, every device, every unfamiliar space. I became an advocate for privacy rights, speaking at conferences, working with organizations to push for stronger regulations and better protections for travelers. The words poured out of me, raw and unfiltered, until the sun rose and the city outside my window began to stir. I published my story online, hoping it might help others avoid the same fate. The response was overwhelming. Messages from strangers, offers of support, stories of similar experiences. Some were angry, others grateful, but all shared a common thread: the need to be seen, to be heard, to reclaim a sense of safety in a world that sometimes feels anything but safe. As the months passed, the nightmares faded. I learned to trust again, slowly, cautiously, but sometimes, late at night, I still saw the blinking green light in my dreams. I still felt the weight of unseen eyes, the chill of being watched. I reminded myself that healing is not a straight line, that some scars never fully fade. But I also knew that I was not alone, that somewhere, someone else was finding the courage to speak, to fight, to reclaim their story from the shadows. One night, unable to sleep, I sat at my desk and began to write. I described the apartment in painstaking details: a velvet settee, the marble fireplace, the way the light shifted through the curtains at dusk. I wrote about the fear, the anger, the sense of violation that lingered long after I left Paris. The words poured out of me, raw and unfiltered, until the sun rose and the city outside my window began to stir. I still felt the weight of unseen eyes, the chill of being watched, and I reminded myself that healing is not a straight line, that some scars never fully fade. But I also knew that I was not alone, that somewhere someone else was finding the courage to speak, to fight, to reclaim their story from the shadows. I published my story online, hoping it might help others avoid the same fate. The response was overwhelming: messages from strangers, offers of support, stories of similar experiences. Some were angry, others grateful, but all shared a common thread: the need to be seen, to be heard, to reclaim a sense of safety in a world that sometimes feels anything but safe. As the months passed, the nightmares faded. I learned to trust again, slowly, cautiously. I traveled, but I was vigilant, checking every room, every device, every unfamiliar space. I became an advocate for privacy rights, speaking at conferences, working with organizations to push for stronger regulations and better protections for travelers. The city felt alive as we stepped out of the airport. The Mexico City air thick with exhaust and the promise of adventure. Our group, 6 friends from college, finally reuniting after years apart, buzzed with excitement as we piled into a taxi and sped through the endless sprawl. We laughed over the driver's playlist, pointed out murals and taco stands, and marveled at the sheer size of the city. When we arrived at our Airbnb in the neighborhood, we were instantly charmed. High ceilings, colorful tile, a balcony overlooking a bustling street. The host greeted us with a smile, handed over the keys, and wished us a wonderful stay. The first days were a whirlwind of sightseeing and street food. We wandered through climbed the steps of the Palacio de Bellas Artes, lost ourselves in the chaos of Mercado de la Merced. Each night, we returned to the apartment exhausted and happy, swapping stories over mezcal and playing cards at the kitchen table. The place felt safe, almost homey, its quirks endearing, like the slightly sticky window latch or the way the water heater sputtered before delivering a hot shower. It was on the third night that things began to change. After a long day exploring, we came home late, hungry and sunburned. The apartment felt stuffy, so we threw open the balcony doors, letting in the cool night air. Someone started the shower, and the familiar rattle of the water heater filled the hallway. I sat on the couch, scrolling through photos, when I heard a faint hiss coming from the kitchen. I shrugged it off as the old pipe settling. An hour later, as we gathered for a late dinner, Laura complained of a headache. "Probably just dehydration," she said, rubbing her temples. Hugo, always the joker, teased her about too much mezcal. But soon, others started to feel off, dizzy, nauseous, a strange heaviness in the air. I chalked it up to exhaustion and altitude, but a nagging worry crept in. The apartment seemed colder, the air thicker, and the usual laughter faded to uneasy silence. By midnight, the symptoms had worsened. Hugo stumbled to the bathroom, clutching his stomach. Laura lay on the couch, her breathing shallow. I tried to call the host, but my message went unanswered. The Wi-Fi flickered, and my phone's battery drained faster than usual. I opened the windows wider, desperate for fresh air, but the dizziness only grew. My own head throbbed, and my thoughts felt slow, muddled. Suddenly, a sharp crash echoed from the bathroom. I rushed in to find Hugo collapsed on the tile, his skin clammy and pale. He mumbled incoherently, his eyes unfocused. Panic surged through me. Laura tried to stand and nearly fainted. "Please." The dispatcher's voice was calm, asking for our address. the number of people affected. She told us to leave the apartment immediately. My hands shook as I relayed the instructions, urging everyone to grab their shoes and get out. The others gathered, fear etched on their faces. We needed help now. I dialed emergency services, my Spanish faltering as I tried to explain poison, gas, people sick, staggered down the stairwell, supporting each other, the world spinning with every step. The air outside was a shock-cold, sharp, alive. We slumped onto the curb, gasping as neighbors peered from their windows. Within minutes, an ambulance arrived, lights flashing. Paramedics checked our vital signs, fitted us with oxygen masks, and loaded Hugo and Laura onto stretchers. The rest of us sat shivering on the sidewalk, fear and guilt warring in our chests. The third night the city was unusually quiet. I returned late from dinner with a new friend, tipsy on wine and laughter. The apartment felt different, colder somehow, as if the walls were holding their breath. I undressed in the bathroom, glancing up at the smoke detector. The green light blinked once, twice, then paused. I frowned, a chill crawling up my spine. I finished my routine quickly and hurried to bed, telling myself I was being silly. But sleep wouldn't come. I tossed and turned, the sheets twisted around my legs. I kept thinking about the smoke detector, about the way it seemed to pulse in the darkness. I sat up, heart pounding, and stared at it. Was it my imagination? Or did the light seem to flicker faster when I moved? I got out of bed and stood beneath it, squinting at the tiny lens in the center. It looked like any other smoke detector, but the blinking was wrong. Too deliberate, too rhythmic. I climbed onto a chair and reached up, my fingers trembling. The plastic was warm to the touch. I twisted it gently, feeling it loosen in my hand. As I pulled it down, I saw a tiny pinhole in the casing of a camera lens, no bigger than a bead. My stomach dropped. I stared at the device, horror rising like bile. Someone had been watching me. I stumbled off the chair, clutching the detector, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I scanned the room, searching for other cameras behind picture frames. Inside the smoke alarm in the bedroom, even in the clock on the nightstand, I found another lens hidden in the air vent, its glass eye glinting in the lamplight. Panic surged through me. I felt exposed, violated, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The heat in Chiang Mai was already thick and sticky by the time we left our guest house, a haze of morning sunlight filtering through the banana palms. Our group of four, me, my girlfriend Leah, and our friends Simon and Priya, had spent the last week chasing adventure. Night markets, temple ruins, motorbikes through mountain switchbacks. Today, we were going ziplining in the rainforest, and the excitement buzzed in my chest like a second heartbeat. We piled into the battered van sent by the tour company, backpacks wedged between our knees, and watched the city fade into green. The driver, a wiry man with a shy smile, pointed out villages and rice paddies as we climbed into the hills. Leah squeezed my hand, her eyes wide with anticipation. "You ready for this?" she whispered. I grinned, feigning bravado, though my stomach fluttered with nerves. At the base camp, the guides greeted us with cold water and nervous jokes. We signed waivers, donned harnesses and helmets, and listened to the safety briefing. "Always double-check your carabiner," the lead guide, No Aiken, instructed. "Never unclip on the platform. And remember, don't look down if you're afraid of heights." We laughed, but I could see the tension in Simon's jaw as he adjusted his harness. The first zipline was a short one, a gentle glide over a shallow ravine. Leah whooped as she zipped across, her hair streaming behind her. Priya followed, shrieking with laughter. I went next, my heart pounding as I stepped off the platform and surrendered to gravity. The wind roared in my ears, and for a moment, I felt weightless free. We moved from platform to platform, each zipline longer and higher than the last. The guides were cheerful, checking our gear at every stop, but I noticed Knock's eyes lingered on the cables, his brow furrowed with concern. "Monsoon season is hard on the lines," he muttered to his assistant in Thai, not realizing I caught enough of the language to understand. I tried to push the worry aside, focusing on the rush of adrenaline as I soared through the trees. At the highest platform, the view took my breath away. The forest below shimmered with dew, birds calling from the canopy. The jungle stretched in every direction, a sea of green broken only by distant mountains. The next zipline disappeared into the mist, the far platform barely visible. "This is the big one," Noak announced, his voice echoing. "Nearly 500 meters. Fast and beautiful. Who's first?" Simon volunteered, flashing a thumbs up. The guide checked his harness, clipped him in, and gave a reassuring pat on the shoulder. Simon stepped to the edge, hesitated, then launched himself into the void. His whoop faded as he zipped away, a blur against the treetops. Leah went next, her laughter trailing behind her. Priya clung to my arm, her nerves finally showing. "You go," she whispered. "I'll be last." I nodded, took a deep breath, and stepped off the platform. The world dropped away. The wind tore at my clothes, the forest a blur beneath my feet. I felt the line vibrate, the harness digging into my hips. Halfway across, I glanced down, just once, and my stomach lurched at the dizzying height. The far platform loomed ahead, and I braked hard, landing awkwardly but safe. Simon was waiting, his face flushed with exhilaration. "That was insane," he shouted over the wind. Leah joined us moments later, her eyes shining. We waited for Priya, watching the cable tremble with her weight as she zipped toward us, her scream echoing through the trees. She landed in a heap, laughing and shaking, and we hugged her, adrenaline making us giddy. The next few lines were shorter, weaving through the canopy. We joked with the guides, snapped photos, and marveled at the beauty of the jungle. I felt invincible, as if nothing could touch us up here among the leaves. At the final platform, Noak gathered us for a group photo. "One more zip, then lunch," he said, gesturing to a long line that vanished into the shadows below. "This one is special fastest in the park." He checked our harnesses, his hands moving quickly, but I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes. I brushed it off, eager for the last rush. Simon volunteered to go first again. He stepped up, clipped in, and grinned at us. "See you at the bottom," called, and with a running leap, he disappeared down the line. We watched him go, his body a dark shape against the green. Suddenly, there was a sharp, metallic snap of sound that cut through the jungle like a gunshot. Simon's scream followed, high and terrified, then abruptly silenced. Time seemed to freeze. For a moment, none of us moved, the echo of Simon's scream hanging in the air. Then chaos erupted. Leah shrieked, clutching my arm. Priya fell to her knees, sobbing. The guide shouted in Thai, scrambling to peer over the edge of the platform. I staggered to the railing, my heart hammering, and looked down. Simon was gone. The zipline cable dangled uselessly, its end frayed and swinging. Far below, through a gap in the trees, I glimpsed a flash of red Simon's shirt, twisted awkwardly on the forest floor. He wasn't moving. Noak barked orders, his face ashen. One guide unclipped and began to scramble down a narrow maintenance ladder, disappearing into the undergrowth. The rest of us huddled together, shock and fear rooting us to the spot. Leah was hyperventilating, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Priya rocked back and forth, whispering Simon's name. Minutes crawled by. The jungle pressed in, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and panic. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal. I felt helpless, useless, every second stretching into eternity. Eventually, Nock's radio crackled to life. The guide below spoke rapidly, his voice tight with urgency. Noak turned to us, his expression grim. "He's alive but hurt. Need to get down now." The descent was harrowing. The maintenance ladder was slick with moss, and my hands slipped as I climbed, my mind racing with images of Simon's fall. Leah and Priya followed, their faces pale and drawn. When we reached the forest floor, the guide led us through tangled vines and roots to where Simon lay. He was conscious, but barely. Blood stained his shirt and pooled beneath his leg, which was bent at a sickening angle. His face was ghostly white, lips trembling with shock. "It hurts," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I can't move." Noak knelt beside him, checking his pulse and murmuring reassurances. "Help is coming," he promised, though his eyes betrayed his fear. I knelt by Simon's head, squeezing his hand, trying to anchor him to the world. Leah sobbed quietly, her tears mixing with the rain that began to fall. The wait for rescue felt endless. The guides radioed for help, but the signal was weak, the response slow. Rain fell harder, drenching us, turning the ground to mud. We huddled around Simon, shielding him from the worst of the downpour. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his breathing shallow and ragged. Priya clung to Leah, both of them shivering. I tried to keep Simon awake, telling him stories, reminding him of home, of the plans we'd made for the rest of the trip. His eyes fluttered open and closed, pain etched deep into every line of his face. Finally, after what felt like hours, we heard voices in the distance. A team of rescuers in bright vests pushed through the undergrowth, carrying a stretcher and medical supplies. They worked quickly, stabilizing Simon's leg, starting an IV, wrapping him in blankets. The relief was overwhelming. I nearly collapsed with it. As they carried Simon away, one of the rescuers pulled me aside. "You're lucky," he said quietly. "If the fall had been a few meters higher, he wouldn't have survived." I nodded, unable to speak, the reality of what had happened settling over me like a heavy shroud. We followed the rescue team back through the jungle, our clothes soaked and our spirits shattered. The Zipline park was closed, police tape strung across the entrance. We gave statements to the authorities, our words tumbling out in fits and starts. The guides hovered nearby, their faces drawn with worry and guilt. At the hospital, Simon was rushed into surgery. His leg was broken in 3 places, his ribs cracked, his collarbone shattered. The doctors worked through the night piecing him back together. We waited in the sterile hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of antiseptic sharp in our noses. Leah and Priya took turns calling Simon's family, their voices trembling as they explained what had happened. I stared at the floor, replaying the moment of the fall over and over in my mind. The sound of the cable snapping, Simon's scream, the terrible silence that followed. I wondered if I would ever forget it. The snow was falling hard, thick flakes swirling down through the pine trees and settling on the ground in muffled silence. My brother and I had wandered farther than we meant to, our boots crunching through the drifts as we followed deer tracks away from the main trail. The campground was supposed to be empty this time of year, too cold for most, the picnic tables buried under white, the fire pits ringed with ice. But we were restless, eager for adventure, and the woods behind our family's cabin had always felt safe. We were halfway up the ridge when we saw it, a cluster of tents huddled beneath the shelter of a cliff face. Their bright colors faded and sagging under the weight of snow. At first we thought maybe some winter campers had braved the cold, but as we drew closer, the silence felt wrong. Smoke rose from the fire ring. Footprints circled the site. The only tracks were ours, winding through the untouched snow. We hesitated at the edge of the clearing, our breath clouding in the cold air, and the campsite looked abandoned, but not old gear was scattered, as if someone had left in a hurry. 2 pairs of boots stood by the flap of the biggest tent, half buried in snow. A battered lantern, its glass cracked, hung from a low branch. There was even a thermos lying on its side, its cap missing, the contents frozen solid. My brother nudged me, his voice barely above a whisper. "Should we check it out?" We crept closer, hearts pounding. Tents were zipped shut, their nylons stiff with frost. I reached for the nearest one, my gloved hand shaking, and pulled the zipper down. Inside, sleeping bags were piled in a tangled heap, clothes strewn across the floor. Someone had left behind a wallet, a pack of cards, and a half-eaten granola bar. The air inside smelled stale, tinged with something I couldn't quite place, something sweet and rotten. My brother called to me from the second tent, his voice sharp with alarm. I hurried over, stumbling through the snow, was standing frozen at the entrance, his face pale. "There's someone in there," he whispered. I peered inside, my heart thudding. At first, I saw only the sleeping bag zipped all the way up. The skin I could see was waxy and pale, the hair matted and dusted with frost. Then I noticed the shape beneath it, a body, motionless, curled on its side. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The world seemed to tilt, the snow falling slower, the silence pressing in. We backed away, stumbling over our own footprints, panic rising in our throats. My brother wanted to run, but I stopped him. "We have to tell someone," I managed, my voice shaking. They called the police, who arrived with snowmobiles and flashlights, their voices low and urgent as they questioned us. We hurried back the way we'd come, not daring to look back at the abandoned camp. The officers unzipped the tent and confirmed what we already knew. There was a body inside when we reached the cabin. We told our parents everything. We led them back to the campsite, the snow now falling even harder, erasing our tracks. The officers unzipped the tent and confirmed what we already knew. There was a body inside. The wind picked up as we stumbled away from the campsite, swirling snow into our faces and erasing the path behind us. My brother's breath came in ragged bursts, white in the air, his eyes wide and unfocused. I tried to keep my panic in check, focusing on the rhythm of our boots crunching through the drifts, but my mind kept replaying the image of the body. I tried to keep how still it was, how the sleeping bag looked almost peaceful, except for the unnatural way it bulged around the shoulders. Halfway back to the cabin, we stopped beneath a stand of spruce, both of us gasping for breath. My brother bent over, hands on his knees. "Did you see his face?" He whispered, voice trembling. I hadn't seen the face. Not really, just a flash of pale skin, a tangle of hair. I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. The unmistakable stillness of death. But the memory pressed against me, heavy and cold. The forest felt different now. Every shadow seemed to move. Every gust of wind sounded like footsteps in the snow. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something emerging from the trees. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something emerging from the trees. When we finally reached the cabin, our parents were inside, talking quietly by the fire. We blurted out what we'd found, stumbling over each other's words. The warmth hit me like a wave. I watched the flames flicker, trying to focus on their warmth, but it did nothing to thaw the chill inside my chest.
Owl!
They questioned us gently, their voices low and serious. I described the campsite as best I could. The colors of the tents, the scattered gear, the boots by the door. I watched them disappear into the trees, their beams bobbing through the darkness. The house felt emptier after they left, as if the discovery had hollowed out something essential. Disbelief, and something else, something like dread. Our parents exchanged a look I'd never seen before. Dad called the sheriff, while Mom wrapped us in blankets and made us sit by the fire. But my mind kept drifting back to the campsite. I wondered how long the tents had been there, how many nights the bodies had lain beneath the snow. How close we'd come to missing them entirely. In one dream, the tents were full of people, their faces hidden, the words hung in the air, heavy and unfinished. In another, the snow melted away to reveal more bodies, but my mind kept drifting back to the campsite. I wondered how long the tents had been there. Yellow tape appeared around the campsite, fluttering in the wind. They tried to talk to us, but our parents kept them at bay. At night, I heard their voices drifting through the trees, speculating about what had happened, spinning stories from scraps of fact and rumor. The sheriff and 2 deputies arrived an hour later, headlights cutting through the storm. My brother added what he'd seen, his voice shaking when he mentioned the body in the sleeping bag. The officers suited up heavy coats, radios, flashlights, and set off into the night. We didn't sleep that night. My brother and I lay awake, listening to the wind rattle the windows, the distant hum of voices on the police radio. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of blue and red lights flickering through the trees. My heart would race all over again. Sometime before dawn, the officers returned. Their faces were drawn, their boots caked with ice and mud. They spoke quietly with our parents, and I caught fragments: 3 bodies, no signs of struggle, likely exposure. The next morning, the woods were crawling with people police. Search and rescue, men in heavy coats, carrying cameras and notebooks. My brother and I watched from the edge of the clearing, feeling like ghosts in our own backyard. The investigation stretched on for days. Reporters showed up, their vans parked along the road, antennas bristling. I couldn't stop thinking about the campsite. I saw it in my dreams sometimes, just as we'd found it, sometimes twisted into something worse. Their faces hidden, their voices whispering secrets I couldn't understand. Endless rows of sleeping bags stretching into the darkness. One afternoon, I slipped away from the house and crept back toward the ridge. The police tape was still there, snapping in the wind. The tents had been removed, but the marks in the snow remained dark patches where the bodies had lain, boot prints frozen in place. I stood at the edge of the clearing, my breath fogging in the cold, and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. A crow landed on a branch overhead, its black eyes fixed on me. I wondered if it had watched us that day, if it had seen what we'd found. I turned and walked back toward the cabin. The woods felt emptier now, as if something vital had been taken. The snow crunching beneath my boots, the silence pressing in from all sides. We started the day early, the kind of cold that makes your breath sting and your boots squeak on the snow. Chasing the kind of adventure I'd only seen in documentaries: blue ice, volcanic black sand, the kind of silence you feel in your bones. I'd been in Iceland for a week. The Glacier cave tour was supposed to be the highlight. Our group was a mix. 2 German backpackers, a couple from Canada, our guide Einar and me. We met at the edge of the parking lot. All of us bundled in layers, faces red from the wind. The hike to the cave was harder than I expected. Crampons bit into the ice, but every step felt like it could go wrong. Einar kept us moving at a steady pace, stopping now and then to point out crevasses or explain how the glacier was always moving, always changing. I tried to listen, but mostly I was focused on my footing, on not slipping, on the ache in my calves. When we reached the cave, it was smaller than I'd imagined, just a low opening in the ice. Blue light filtering through the ceiling. It felt like being inside a frozen lung, the air sharp and metallic. We followed, ducking low, the air growing colder and stiller with every step. Einar went in first, testing the ground with his pole. The walls glowed, smooth and wet, and the sound of our boots echoed in the tunnel. No one spoke much. Inside, the cave widened a little, enough for us to stand in a loose circle. Einar checked the ceiling, tapping here and there. Listening for hollow spots, he seemed satisfied. So we took off our packs and started looking around. The Germans took photos, their camera flashes bouncing off the ice. The Canadian couple whispered to each other, pointing at the patterns in the walls. I kept my gloves on, hands shoved in my pockets. The cold was different in there, deeper somehow, not just on the skin, but in the bones. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the way the light changed as clouds passed overhead. Einar told us to stay together, not to wander off. The cave is alive, he said. It can change in minutes. I nodded, not sure if he was being poetic or just careful. We moved deeper, the ceiling dropping until we had to crouch. The air felt heavier, the silence pressing in. I started to feel uneasy, but I told myself it was just nerves. I'd wanted adventure, and here it was, real, cold, and a little bit dangerous. One moment, we were standing in a narrow chamber, Einar pointing out a vein of volcanic ash in the ice. The next, there was a low, grinding sound, like distant thunder, but closer, more personal. Einar's head snapped up. "Back now," he shouted. It happened fast, his voice echoing in the tunnel. We turned, scrambling for the entrance. The Germans were closest, moving quickly. I was in the middle, the Canadians behind me. The ceiling groaned, a deep vibration I felt in my teeth. Then the world shifted. A section of the roof gave way with a sickening crack, and ice crashed down all around us. I didn't see it coming. Something heavy slammed into my shoulder, knocking me sideways. My helmet bounced off the wall, and I dropped to my knees. I tried to get up, but the ice kept coming, pinning my arm and leg. The light vanished, replaced by a crushing, freezing darkness. I couldn't move. My right arm was trapped, numb almost instantly from the cold. My leg was twisted, pain radiating up to my hip. I could hear shouting Einar's voice, the Canadians calling my name. The darkness was the worst part. I tried to remember what Einar had said about the cave, how it could change in minutes, how the ice was never still. I couldn't tell how deep I was buried, couldn't see anything, couldn't move enough to shift the ice. I tried to shout, but my voice was weak, swallowed by the cave. I listened for the others, for Einar, for any sign that help was coming. Time lost meaning. I drifted in and out, the cold, making my thoughts slow and slippery. I forced myself to stay awake, to listen, to shout when I could. Sometimes I heard voices, sometimes just the drip of water somewhere above me. Wondered if more would collapse, if I would be buried completely. I focused on small things. wiggling my toes, flexing my free hand, counting my breaths. The rescue was slow. I heard Einar's voice, closer now, calm but urgent. He told me to keep talking, to stay awake. Told me to keep talking, to stay awake. I answered as best I could, my teeth chattering so hard I could barely form words. The pain was blinding, but I gritted my teeth and let them pull me out. The ice shifted above me, and light filtered in a pale blue glow that felt like salvation. Hands reached in, clearing chunks of ice, freeing my arm first, then my leg. The air outside the trap felt thin and sharp, but I could breathe, I could see, I could move. They wrapped me in blankets, gave me a hot drink, checked my injuries. The cold was still there, but it felt different now, less threatening. My arm was broken, my leg bruised and swollen, but nothing worse. The Canadians hugged me, the Germans patted my back, Einar squeezed my shoulder and told me I was lucky. We waited for the rescue team, huddled together near the entrance of the cave, more like a reminder of what we'd survived. Einar kept us talking, kept us moving, kept us awake. When the rescuers arrived, they checked us over, loaded me onto a stretcher, and carried me out. The hike back was a blur pain, exhaustion, relief. The sky was dark by the time we reached the parking lot, the stars sharp and cold above us. At the hospital, they set my arm, gave me painkillers, and told me to rest. I lay in the bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the collapse over and over in my mind. I thought about the darkness, the cold, the feeling of being buried alive. I wondered if I'd ever go back into a cave, if I'd ever trust the ice again. The days that followed were slow. My body healed, but my mind kept returning to the cave, the sound of the ice breaking, the darkness, the helplessness. I talked to the others, shared our stories, tried to make sense of what had happened. We all agreed. The adventure had changed us. The cave was beautiful, but it was also dangerous, unpredictable, alive. We'd gone looking for excitement, for something to remember, and we'd found it in the dark, in the cold, in the moment when everything could have ended. We arrived at the cabin just before dusk, the sky a pale wash of blue and gold over the Norwegian fjord. It was supposed to be a reunion for friends from university, scattered by jobs and life, finally together again. The cabin was perched on a rocky slope, its windows facing the water, the nearest neighbor a mile away. The air was sharp and clean, the kind of cold that cleared your head and made every sound carry. We unpacked quickly, laughing and shoving each other, eager to start the fire and open the first bottle of aquavit. The fjord below was glassy and dark, reflecting the distant snow-capped peaks. I remember thinking how empty it felt. No boats, no voices, just the occasional gull and the slap of water against the rocks. We ate dinner by candlelight, stories and jokes echoing in the small wooden room. Afterward, we bundled up and went outside, mugs of hot chocolate steaming in our hands. That's when we saw the lights. At first I thought it was a boat, two pale orbs gliding low across the water, moving in perfect tandem. But there was no sound, no engine. The lights drifted slowly, then paused, hovering just above the surface. Not even the ripple of a wake. We watched in silence, the hair on my arms prickling, until the orbs suddenly shot upward, vanishing into the trees on the far side of the fjord. We stared at each other, half laughing, half nervous. Northern Lights? Someone joked. But we all knew better. The aurora didn't move like that. We stood outside a little longer, but the lights didn't return. Eventually the cold drove us back indoors, where we tried to shake off the unease with more stories and another round of drinks. Had been that night, sleep was hard to come by. I kept replaying the lights in my mind, how they'd moved. We watched together, barely breathing, as the flicker grew brighter, split into two, and began to glide along the shore. The fjord was still, the moonlight silver on the water. How silent everything around midnight. I got up to use the bathroom and glanced out the window. But then, just at the edge of the trees. I saw a flicker like someone moving with a lantern, too far away to make out details. I woke Jonas, who grumbled, but followed me to the window. Oh, no footsteps, no voices, just those silent, floating lights. We woke the others, and soon all four of us were pressed to the glass, whispering theories, fishermen, pranksters, maybe even drones, but nothing fit. The lights moved with purpose, weaving between trees, then abruptly vanished again. We debated calling the police, but what would we say? Are lights outside? It sounded ridiculous. Eventually we went back to bed, but I kept listening for footsteps or voices, every creak of the cabin making my heart race. The next morning, the mood was tense. We joked about the lights over breakfast, but no one really laughed. We decided to hike down to the water, hoping to find some explanation, a boat, footprints, anything. The shoreline was empty, just slick rocks and patches of seaweed. Our boats, tied up at the small dock, were right where we'd left them. But as we walked back, I noticed something odd. A set of footprints circling the cabin, pressed deep into the frost. They were too large for any of us, and they didn't match the boots we'd worn. The prints started near the dock, looped around the house, and disappeared into the woods. We followed them for a while, but they faded quickly among the moss and pine needles. Every so often, one of us would glance outside, scanning the trees for movement. That afternoon, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and making the cabin groan. This time, they were closer, moving along the water's edge, then up the slope toward the cabin. We stayed inside, playing cards and trying to ignore the feeling that we were being watched. That night, the lights came back. We killed the lights inside, crouching by the window, watching as the orbs drifted between the trees. They stopped about 50 yards from the house, hovering in the darkness. I could see the outline of the rocks, the glint of frost, but nothing else. We took turns keeping watch, listening for footsteps, for the sound of a boat engine, for anything that would make sense of what we'd seen. No shapes, no people, just those two silent, floating lights. The lights lingered for what felt like hours, then slowly retreated, slipping back down to the water and vanishing beneath the trees. Jonas wanted to go outside to confront whatever it was, but we held him back. None of us slept. I kept glancing at the clock, counting down the hours until dawn, but time stretched and warped in the silence. But the night passed in silence, broken only by the wind and the occasional creak of the cabin. We waited out the night, pressed to the windows, watching the lights recede into the blackness beyond the trees. No one spoke above a whisper. Jonas paced, agitated, muttering about going outside. Every creak of the cabin made my heart lurch. Jonas paced, agitated, muttering about going outside, but the rest of us held him back, fear outweighing curiosity. The prince wandered into the woods, then vanished among the moss and pine needles. Every time someone stepped outside, the others watched the tree line, expecting the lights to return in daylight. When the first gray light seeped through the curtains, we let ourselves breathe again, but the relief was thin. The air in the cabin felt stale, heavy like we'd brought something in from the night. I tried to laugh it off, but my voice sounded strange in the quiet. We found the boats untied, drifting loose at the dock. The knot-eyed tide was gone, replaced by a sloppy loop that none of us recognized. More footprints circled the house, bigger than any of ours, pressed deep into the rime. Jonas swore, his face red with anger, but there was nothing to chase, no one to confront. We tried to pack up, but the tension only grew. The idea of getting stranded in the woods, with the lights and the footprints, was almost worse than staying. We found our boats untied, bumping gently against the dock. The wind had picked up, rattling the windows and making the cabin groan. The fjord, once peaceful, felt hostile, like we were trespassers who'd overstayed our welcome. I kept thinking I saw a movement between the tree shadows slipping just out of sight. By midday, nerves were fraying. Jonas slammed a mug down and snapped at Eric for blocking the door. Anna started crying quietly, her hands shaking as she stuffed clothes into her bag. I tried to keep everyone calm, but my own hands wouldn't stop trembling. We all felt it. Something was different now. Something had shifted. We debated leaving immediately, but the road out was narrow, icy, and the storm was moving in fast. We locked the doors, drew the curtains, and waited, every sense straining for the next sign that we weren't alone. By morning, we were exhausted and on edge. More footprints circled the cabin, some fresh, some half-eased by wind and frost. We packed quickly, not speaking much, each of us glancing over our shoulders as we loaded the car. As we drove away, we stopped in the nearest village to tell a local shopkeeper what had happened. She listened quietly, then shrugged. "You saw the watchers," she said, as if it was the most ordinary thing in the world. "They come sometimes. Best to leave them alone." We didn't argue. We drove south. The fjord shrinking in the rearview mirror, the cabin lost among the trees. None of us ever went back, and none of us ever forgot the silent lights that watched us from the edge of the world. I was lying on the hotel bed, tossing a foam football up and catching it, trying not to think about how weird the room smelled. It was kind of like old socks mixed with cleaning spray. My little sister Ellie was watching cartoons with the volume up way too loud. Mom was digging through her suitcase for pajamas. Dad had gone out to the car for something, probably his phone charger, which he always forgot. Dad promised we'd get to see Yellowstone soon, but right now, all I cared about was the pool. We'd been driving for days, and I was sick of the car. The sign out front said heated indoor pool, the picture of a dolphin, even though we were in Wyoming, and there was no way a dolphin had ever been here. Still, it was better than another night in a tent. The tiles were cold, and there was a weird brown stain by the toilet. I tried not to look at it. When I came out, Dad was back, and he gave me the Dan T. run in the halls speech for the 100th time. But I could tell he was tired too, so I just nodded and grabbed my towel. Mom finally found my swim trunks, so I changed in the bathroom. The pool was actually kind of cool. The water was warm, and there was a mural of a beach on the wall, with palm trees and a really bad-looking crab. Ellie kept splashing me, and I dunked her, which made her scream, but Mom told us to knock it off. She kept saying how nice it was to have a real bed, but honestly, the mattress was lumpy, and the sheets smelled like bleach. At first, I thought I was dreaming because the voices sounded far away and echoey, like when you're underwater. We played Marco Polo until my fingers got wrinkly, and then Dad said it was time to go back. I didn't want to, but I was hungry, and he promised we could get vending machine snacks. Back in the room, I ate a bag of Doritos and watched some dumb game show, while Mom set up the pull-out couch for Ellie and me. Dad double-checked the lock on the door and said, "Let's all try to get some sleep. Big day tomorrow." I rolled my eyes, but I was tired, so I crawled under the covers and listened to Ellie snore. I woke up to shouting. At first I thought I was dreaming, because the voices sounded far away and echoey, like when you're underwater. But then I heard a woman scream, loud and real, and I sat straight up. Dad was already out of bed. Moving fast, Mom grabbed Ellie, who was still half asleep, and pulled her close. I felt my heart pounding so hard, I thought it might explode. There was more yelling, and then bang, bang, bang. Gunshots so loud I felt them in my chest. I froze. I'd never heard a real gun before, only on TV. And it sounded different. Realer, scarier. Dad crouched by the door, peeking through the peephole. Mom whispered for us to get down, so I slid off the bed and hid behind the chair, pulling Ellie with me. I wanted to ask what was happening, but I didn't dare make a noise. Would they try to get in? Would Dad be able to stop them? They all stayed super quiet. I could hear footsteps running in the hallway, doors slamming, someone crying. Mom was shaking, but she kept her voice calm, telling us to stay still, not to make a sound. Would they try to? My mind kept replaying the gunshots, the way the woman screamed. I hugged Ellie tighter, and she buried her face in my shoulder. Dad tried calling the front desk, but the phone just beeped, like it was off the hook or something. I started thinking about what would happen if the person with the gun came to our door. After a while, we heard sirens outside, lots of them. Red and blue lights flashed through the curtains. Get in. Would Dad be able to stop them? I peeked out from behind the chair and saw Mom crying silently, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. Dad told us to stay put, and I could hear police officers yelling in the hallway, telling everyone to stay in their rooms. I peeked out from behind the chair and saw Mom crying silently, wiping her eyes with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. Dad opened it just a crack, and a cop in a bulletproof vest asked if we were okay. It felt like forever before someone knocked on our door. Dad said yes, and the cop told us not to leave the room until they said it was safe. I wanted to ask what happened, but the cop was already moving on. We didn't sleep after that. I tried to play games on my phone, but my hands were shaking too much. Ellie kept asking if we could go home, and Mom just hugged her and said, "Soon, sweetie, soon." Dad sat by the door, listening for any noise, his face all tight and serious. In the morning, the hallway was full of people, cops, hotel workers, other guests. Dad talked to a police officer who said there'd been a shooting, but not to worry. The bad guy was caught. Some people were crying, and there was yellow tape blocking off a room down the hall. I didn't feel any better. I kept thinking about how close it had been, how we could have been hurt. When we left, I saw a reporter with a big camera talking to a lady in pajamas. We packed up fast. Mom didn't even check for forgotten socks or chargers. We packed up fast. Mom didn't even check for forgotten socks or chargers. When we left, I saw a reporter with a big camera talking to a lady in pajamas. Dad told us not to look, just to get in the car. I kept thinking about the gunshots, about the woman screaming, about how everything can change in a second. I didn't tell anyone. The parking lot was full of news vans and police cars. As we drove away, I stared out the window, watching the hotel get smaller and smaller. I didn't feel safe until we were miles down the highway, and even then, every time I heard a loud noise, my heart jumped. But I slept with the light on for weeks after that.